Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and a warm welcome to the Parallel Technical Session 29. Welcome to the Chairperson, Professor Savoykar, Co-Chair, Dr. Vikas Kumar. Today's speakers, Professor Subhamoy Bhattacharya, Professor Satyanarayan Reddy, and Professor Sumanta Haldar. And welcome to all the participants. Before I hand over the session to the chairs, let me briefly showcase the 3D platform so that the participants can get an idea how to post their questions. So I am just logging into our virtual platform where the participants are listening to this lecture live. So here in the lobby, so we are at Hall A. So it is being played here. So I just close that so that there is no echo. So the delegates who are attending from Hall A, you can put questions to the speaker by clicking this Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. So I just wanted to show this because earlier it was at a different place. So now we have replaced it just below the screen. So after the end and during or at the end of the lecture, you can post your questions by clicking Q&A tab. Well, it is my pleasure to introduce the chairperson and co-chair of today's session, Professor Poornanand P. Savoykar is the chair of this session. He completed his BE and ME from Goa Engineering College and PhD from IIT Bombay. Presently, he is a professor in the Department of Civil Engineering, Goa Engineering College, India. His research interests are geotechnical earthquake engineering, alternate materials, and steel structures. He has published several papers in journals and conferences. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
Co-chair of the session, Dr. Vikas Kumar. He is presently a faculty in Civil Engineering Department at Central University of Haryana, and his research areas are soil stabilization and artificial intelligence, and he has published more than 10 papers in journals as well as in the conferences. Welcome, Dr. Vikas.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And I am very honored to be a part of this conference.
Thank you. Now I hand over the session to the chairperson and co-chair for taking over further, please.
Thank you very much, Rivalsa, and the organizers for giving me an opportunity to chair this session, wherein we have very interesting presentations by Subhamoy Bhattacharya from University of Surrey, and followed by two special lectures by Dr. Satyanarayan Reddy and Sumanta Haldar. So it's my pride and privilege to introduce the SOAP speaker, Subhamoy Bhattacharya. Bhattacharya ji holds a chair in geomechanics at University of Surrey since October 2012 and is visiting fellow at University of Bristol. He earned his doctorate from University of Cambridge on topic investigating failure mechanism of piles in seismically liquefiable soils. Previously, he was working as a senior lecturer in dynamics at University of Bristol, department lecturer in engineering science at University of Oxford, junior research fellow at Somerville College, University of Oxford, college lecturer at Bresson College and Lady Margaret Hall, University of Oxford. Has published several papers, over 390 papers in various national and international journals and conference proceedings. It's our pride to have you, Subhamoy ji, here on this platform. The stage is yours. And as told by organizers, the lecture time is 30 minutes, followed by 5 minutes question answer session.
Thank you for the invitation to present in this conference. The what I will present is something new, is something what we are looking forward to. So effectively, challenges in the design and construction of offshore wind turbine foundation in seismic areas. This work I've done in collaboration with a lot of my colleagues from different universities and different countries, and they are given here. The names are given here and also in the paper as well. So what is the content of this talk? The first content is basically what is the context. So why we want to do wind turbines. So effectively, all the governments are aiming towards net zero. That means they will not contribute to add carbon to the environment that is causing global warming. And one thing is important is the wind power and the future energy system. So how will the future energy looks like? So currently we mostly use fossil fuel. So we're burning coal, burning oil, burning gas, and that not only adds to global warming, but also health problems. They do with the breathing and other particles in the atmosphere. So I'll briefly put that context because it is a very new area, new field. Then I will talk about the challenges in the design of foundations and give some example analysis. So first is, so we are entering the third C of the triple C crisis. So first C was the credit crisis. So if you remember in 2008, there was a credit crisis, the whole financial meltdown. The whole world had to face all the brunt of these things. And the next big one was COVID, which we are going through still. The whole world is shut down mostly. We're trying to emerge. And third one is the climate that is coming. And this climate crisis will be even bigger than this two combined. What is the reason? The reason is that we had decades of industrial revolution, which was funded or which was possible, which was powered by the fossil fuel. So we explored oil and gas, we burnt it however we wanted it, and that caused all these developments, all these things. But now we have to move down to the sustainable revolution. We have to have something that is sustainable, that will not make the world unable to live in most parts. That's the context. Now, what can engineers do? So we can decarbonize the energy system. So there are so many, because the modern economy runs on energy. So whatever you do, now, for example, I am talking, we use energy. Now, can we use these systems to decarbonize? Can we use energy which are decarbonized? So one of the important energy systems that is completely green is offshore wind. Because wind is renewable, wind is always there. And if you can use a wind to generate power, that would be excellent. So this is one of the systems that can be used. So that's the main context of this talk. Wind energy is not new. So wind energy has been used for centuries for sailing ships, sawing wood, grinding grains, and many more. It is the oldest source of machine power. And this helped certain countries to basically become a big power. And in those days, whoever can make large number of ships or large boats are most powerful because they could explore the whole world. So Holland, they could produce cut wood, saw wood using wind power, and that made them one of the pioneers of the industrial revolution. They could automate. So they are the first country. So again, wind is nothing new. And it is becoming a big industry, $1 trillion industry by 2040, even more. So why it is sustainable? Because wind will blow as long as the sun is shining, because it is the sun that hits the land and water differentially, and that differential creates a change of pressure, and that drives the wind. So wind will be always there. As long as we have a solar system, the wind will be there. And the figure on the right side shows a graph. And this is a 6.2 megawatt machine. So 6.2 megawatt machine. So what we can see, we don't need much wind speed to produce power. You can produce power from 4 meters per second at the hub height. So we don't need much wind speed to produce power. So therefore, this shows that it can be really sustainable because we can produce energy even at a very modest wind speed. We don't need high wind speed to produce power. Right. Also, there are a few things. If we do something now, we should not leave its footprint for the next generation. Again, if you do something with wind farm, we can completely decommissioning it from the ground, so nothing will be left behind for generations to come. And that is one of the aspects of sustainability, that we can give back the ground, give back the ocean floor how it was before we put the wind farm. So just to give an example, here is one of the first wind farm, and this one is only 500 kilowatt machine, so half a megawatt machine. It was built in 1992 and it was dismantled in 2016 after its full design life. So what I will show you is this little video to show how we could completely decommission from the sea. So after we harness the energy for its lifetime, we could completely dismantle the whole thing and give back the sea floor as it is. So here is the steps how to decommission. So what you can see here is, first of all, we take the top part out, so the tower section out, and then we gradually take the pile out of the ground. Okay, here's a little video. So what we have just seen that after the is useful design life, it could be completely decommissioned with no issue. Now let's talk about what's happening now. What's happening now? Most countries in Europe, they are banning petrol and diesel cars from UK from their fleet. And UK's plan is by 2030 there will be no petrol and diesel cars. So where will the extra energy come from? We need to produce energy in, say, because these cars will be most electric car or hybrid car, electric car or hydrogen car. And where will this new energy come from? We're going to produce huge amount of nuclear power, new power plants, can be nuclear, can be whatever, not based on fossil fuel. Or where will this come from? If you look into, if I compare the sort of low carbon technology, two pumping technology, one is nuclear power plant and another is offshore wind farm. So if you look into this whole thing, if you look into a nuclear power plant, it takes at least 10 years to build and commission, because there is a lot of certification, lot of safety checks, lot of planning permissions, different checks, because these are can be very dangerous. On the other hand, we can build a wind farm in 6 to 9 months. The cost to build nuclear power plant is very high. It runs in billions. But the cost to produce a wind farm is cheap. It's around 1/20th the cost. Decommissioning, we don't know yet what's the cost of decommissioning of a nuclear power plant. But clearly, you can see we could decommission a complete wind farm in a matter of weeks, and the costs are negligible. So they're trying to put in perspective what is the potential of an offshore wind farm. So how can these things produce power? Now, how is the future energy looking like? Now, one of the main issues is that how do we store energy? Because often you may have a very good wind speed, but there's no demand for energy. Also, there can be situations where you have a high demand for energy, but the wind speed is not very high, is not producing enough. So what we need is a storage. And the engineers have worked out the storage system. So it can be either a battery, so you store the energy in a battery and you optimize it via grid. For example, is Hywind project, also known as Backwind, by Equinor, a company in Norway. The other option, which is increasingly looking very important, and many countries are already doing it, is hydrogen. So what is done is you produce electricity in offshore by wind. So you use green energy, so you use blowing wind to produce electricity. You use electricity to desalinate seawater, and then you simply use a hydrolyzer to electrolyze the water. So you can electrolyze and you break into hydrogen oxygen. The hydrogen you compress 700 bar to reach the storage volume, and that stored hydrogen can be used as energy. And this energy is equal like a LPG or LNG, what we use for our cooking gas or everything. Everything can run on hydrogen. So what you can see, you can use wind to produce hydrogen, and that can be a cycle on its own. And it is abundant, it is renewable. There is nothing stopping from doing it. Every country who has got water can produce energy. So in that case, we will not rely on countries to import oil. So that is one of the very important points of conflict. So some of those countries which produce oil are not one of the stable in terms of politically, etc., creates all the problems. Now this already started. So if you look in this picture, it shows hydrogen power train is running in many places, and there are plans to accelerate. If you under the new mini government, Then you have a hydrogen powered yacht, hydrogen powered fuel cell bus, hydrogen powered car. So all these things are happening. Again, on the backdrop, it is the wind that can produce the hydrogen and that can run economy. So what I'm going to show you in the first part of the talk is that wind is a sustainable solution, is a possible solution for net zero, and it can facilitate the green hydrogen economy. So next economy will be green hydrogen economy, right? And also, what I'm not covering here is that nuclear power plant accidents actually all linked up with the cooling power. And what I've shown in my some papers is that you need a stable cooling power to make power plants safe in seismic areas, and wind turbines can give that stable power. There are also floating turbines as well, so that you can harness energy from deeper water, but that's for some other day. And you can read some of the papers in the reference that can give you an idea about all these things. You can read all the things in these particular references. There are some of the books, these talk in a more general way about wind power and how it can help to reduce the effect of climate change. The second part is more engineering part. And what I would like to do is try to whistle stop important points. The important points is, if you look into offshore structures, there are many offshore structures, like oil and gas platforms. But the main thing is that we cannot directly use those principles to design offshore wind turbines. So that needs further thought. So this is not a structure, but it is a more complex structure than an oil and gas structure, which I will cover in a minute. Second issue is offshore wind covers a large area. So therefore, it will cover kilometers, like tens of kilometers, because the spacing is around a kilometer of the turbine. So, and as they cover a large area, there is change in ground profile, change in water depth. So therefore, we cannot design individual foundations individually, because it is expensive to design each foundation individually. Therefore, we also have to use a sort of mass-produced approach to have the economy of scale. So therefore, the design is very complex, because if we make as the mass-produced thing, so we replicate that design the whole wind farm. So if there is omission in one foundation design, it will replicate it in all the design, leading to big risk. Therefore, we have to be very careful about doing the design. So this picture shows on the right-hand side what's the typical spacing of turbines. So if we know the predominant wind direction, and depending on the diameter of the rotor, means the blade diameter, we typically have 6 diameter as the spacing of turbines to avoid the wake effect. Otherwise, we will have a lower efficiency in terms of energy production. And let's look into the turbine future. We slightly outdated this slide, because this slide shows the turbines from 3.6 megawatt to 8 megawatt, but we have now got 12 megawatt, 14 megawatt turbines available. So one machine can produce 14 megawatt. It's a large amount of power it can produce. Now, this slide, what I'm going to show you here is that what you can see, that as the turbines get larger and larger, you can see that the tower gets longer and longer. So if you look into 8 megawatt turbine, it is 110 meter length long tower. At the top, you have got a 550 ton mass. Each blade weighs roughly 30 tons, each blade weighs. So that's why they are built offshore, because you can easily bring these things offshore and put it there rather than onshore. Onshore, you can't scale it up. The onshore is very difficult to transport, carry large piece of equipment. So the roads are not there. Roads are not ready to carry big stuff. Now, so effectively, it's a tower. On the top, you have got a large mast, and you have the foundation for it. And if you look into, if you are to explain this to a child, what this structure is basically a flagpole where you can push your flag, like a flagpole. So what you can see on the picture is a flagpole. On the top, you're putting a giant washing machine. Things rotate, and on the top of that, you're trying to send some wave here, some wave. You're passing through some wave, and the main idea is that how we design the foundation for this thing during an earthquake. That's the whole problem. Mind you, this is very different from a oil and gas structure. In oil and gas structure, which is on the right hand side, you can see it's a large rigid jacket, and the top is heavy mass. So they are very different types of structures, and that makes the whole design more interesting. Okay, and let's talk about the loads in short. So what are the loads here? The loads are, of course, the wind load is the main load. So the wind load is the wind that the blades catch and produce power. So that is shown at the top by a wind load, which is stochastic varying, time varying load. The next big load or heavy load is a wave load, because if you put it in sea, there will be waves slamming the structure. That will give you some wave load on the structure. Apart from that, these are large machines, and you often have a imbalance of mass, and that gives you a 1P load. And there is also load on the tower, and that load is known as 3P tower, 3P load. They are the loads acting on the turbine all the time. And let's look into loads for just look into for 1 minute interval. So loads, so what you can see in the top at the hub level, you get the load from the wind. That can be a thrust, and also the imbalance of the blades. You also get wave loads at the bottom part. It shows there as a dynamic wave load, and then you get a 3P load in the tower. That's a load. And then, because we have to have economy of scale, typically these days you have got wind farms about one gigawatt. So one wind farm producing 1 gigawatt of power means 1,000 megawatt of power. So in this case, you need a large area. So we are also farther away from the sea. So as you go farther away from the sea, the foundations also change. So in a shallow water, in a good sea condition, you'll put a gravity base. Then as you go deeper and deeper, you start to put a monopile, means a one large diameter pile. Then you put suction caissons. You then move on to tripod, a jacket on pile. 60 meters or more, you start to go into floating system. And here is a figure showing the water depth. In some places where the water depth are more than 100 meters, you will only go for a floating system. So here is currently the types of structure being used, and you can see with water depth, as water depth increases, you start to go from gravity base to floating. You can read all the design parts in this book published 2 years ago, giving quite a bit of details about the design and the different parts. What are the issues? What I am picking up here are the important points that are related to seismic design. One important part is serviceability requirement for design, meaning these are typically designed for 30 years. So what we do, we got to predict the amount of tilt, if it tilts over the lifetime. So in a seismic area, if the ground is liquefiable, there can be a tilt in the whole design. And how do you create the tilt? And what do we do that we have the tilt to a desired limit? So if you see here, there's a thing called limit of warranty, which is theta limit. That means warranty is lost if that is breached. So typically they are 0.5 degree, 0.75 degree is the amount of tilt allowed after an earthquake or under any condition. Now the reasons are different because if the wind turbine tilts, there can be quite a bit of a problem. And I'm not going to details here. One important part is the higher P delta effect. There can be bearing issues, the bearing wear and tear, etc. For seismic, what the important part is the RN acceleration. Because during earthquake, one thing we must not get is the top machine accelerates more than 0.2 G to 0.4 G. So there is still a discussion about what the amount is. Typically 0.2 G to 0.4 G is acceleration that can be allowed at the top. So we have to make sure that the adequate stiffness, or however we do the design, that the access is not breached. Also, due to liquefaction, there can be some tilting. So in terms of overall design considerations, there are quite a few. One is the ultimate limit state, serviceability limit state, modes of vibration, fatigue limit state, and things are how can you install, how can you remove, robustness, and economics. Now I'll touch on now.
There are 2 minutes remaining.
How many?
2 minutes.
Okay. So the main things are we are building around the wind farms there. There are quite a bit of issues there to do with fault movement, shaking, liquefaction, and these can lead to various things. And the risk increase as the earthquake intensity goes higher. Now there can be tsunami as well if the earthquake is more than 7.5 in some situations. And so as a designer, one has to go through all the different steps to make sure that the RN acceleration is not exceeded and it doesn't tilt more than 0.5 or 0.75 degrees. And here are the different stages. And they are put on here. So one important part is how do you combine the effect of wind, wave, and earthquake? So we have to do a standard analysis to find out what happened to the ground. We have to put PY curve, but make sure that the PY curves comply with the requirement. Meaning you must have a zero resistance at the top, at small amounts of Y. So that's the PY curve for liquefiable soil, which must be used. You can read about in this particular book, which I authored a couple of years ago. For floating systems, we got to find out the fault rupture. So again, we have to understand how much a fault rupture can induce movement in the whole system. And we can do the analysis based on that and provide adequate safety fuse and other things. Again, we have some analysis of the tension leg platform, giving a ground motion to see how it behaves. And that's for tension leg platform analysis. So to conclude, offshore wind turbines are important component of fusion energy systems. So we have to look into these systems more carefully. SLS criteria dominate the design. The important steps are assessment of seismic hazard at a given site, selection of strong motion, then load combination criteria considering wind, wave, earthquake, and the control system design. So I will finish now, and I'm happy to pass back to the
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Subhamoy, for a very interesting and informative lecture. So now I request Dr. Vikas Kumar to take up the question, if any.
Yes, sir. Yes, sure.
Yeah.
There are one question, sir, that is asked from Professor B.K. Maheshwari. The question is that can the component monopiles and the cables from decommissions can be reused for next wind turbine?
So the pile will undergo a lot of corrosion damage because the piles are actually put in the ground. So there will be a lot of corrosion damage and fatigue damage. So it cannot be directly used because you will lose all its life. But however, they can be again recycled. So you can again melt it and again reuse it. And that's the whole purpose. So we try to reuse, recycle, reduce the waste. So that's the whole purpose to use that. And again, in terms of offshore cables, there will be copper cables, copper wires, etc. Again, is of course we can recycle them after so the main aim is now to not do more mining, but keep on recycling, reusing, and make better use of the resource we have already got.
I think I'll just ask one more question, sir. You just
Yes.
explain all the things related to the offshore wind turbines regarding sustainable energy, then how we can design the grounded system and floating system, and then what are the components that are to be considered for the liquefaction also. My question is that, sir, can which type of technology can be used about monopiles and the jacket technology for the wind turbines, open wind turbine system?
Yeah. So basically, each country is different, right? So what we need is a monopile. Monopile is easy to fabricate because what you need is a steel plate, and you take a steel plate and simply turn it over and you weld it there, right? And you sort of and you weld it, right? And you can get a monopile, right? Now, in certain countries where labor is expensive, they would go for automated monopile because you don't need much labor. Labor is expensive and things are cheap. But in certain countries where the labor is cheap, but things are expensive to buy the material, in that case, they might go for a jacket foundation. Because jackets, they have a small diameter pile. So if you look into monopiles, they are now 8-meter diameter, 10-meter diameter, large monopile. So you need a vessel, equipment, the vessel to install, they may need to be large. Many countries will not have those vessels because offshore industry is very niche industry, niche market. You need the expertise to do these large things. Now, often will not have those things. Those countries will find it easier and cheaper to use small diameter pile, like typically the diameter will be 1.5 meter, 2 meter, 1.5 meter. You have a jacket, and this can be installed by small contractors. They're available there. The overall cost will be lower. So what you want to look into your own supply chain. So who will do all the things for us? If you say, okay, fine, there are only few people can do it from Europe, you got to wait for many years for them to come and do it. They don't have vessel. So the answer is economics. So we want to produce power. Let's see what system. So basically the main aim is to put the big turbine on the top of the tower, because the turbine will tell you that the hub height has to be 110 meters. So you must have a 110 meter tower. Now, what foundation I would need? Let's see what gives us the cheapest price, because we don't want to go for monopile because other countries are doing it. So they're doing it for their own economy. So that works for them. A country like India, where you have labor is less expensive, you can look into your own supply chain, your own foundation. And that's why there's a lot of scope for innovation. If you look into innovation going on in this industry in Japan, in China, in Korea, in Taiwan, they're trying to innovate new foundations, new things. Because though the wind industry started in Europe, but now they are spreading worldwide, and each wants to adapt based on their own supply chain, their strength. So what is the strength of the country? You know, what can I get? You know, why do I have to copy that technology? What we need is a foundation. The foundation must carry these loads. So we can start from bottom up and build.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you, sir.
Yeah, is there any effect on environment if we consider, say, so many wind turbines installed in the sea? So is there any interaction effects of this installing turbines?
Well, the interesting effects can be the bird flying. So often you will see in some parts there are migratory birds. The birds migrate from far off countries, right? So what happens? As the birds fly, they often fly very close to the water surface. So very close to the water level of the sea. So often in certain countries, when they do environmental check, they say must have that height. So the blades must have a minimum gap because the birds can fly and the bird may not see the blades turning and hitting them. So you have, people have found out. And anyway, look, the main thing is that we are not burning any fossil fuel. We're not burning oil and gas or coal, and it is not a nuclear, right? People often care about nuclear power plants close to their home. What will happen? Nobody knows. So this is one of the good solutions, and this is being used for ages.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Any other question? I think there's no more question, no?
Now we can move to the next speaker.
Yeah. So we'll now go to the thank you very much, Subhamoy, for excellent presentation. We'll now move to the next topic. Next talk is on effect of shape of footing on coefficient of elastic uniform compression of foundation material by C.V. Satyanarayana Reddy. C.V. Satyanarayana Reddy is presently working as a professor, Department of Civil Engineering in Andhra University. He has received his MTech Geotechnical Engineering from IIT Madras and ME Structures from Andhra University. He has completed his PhD from NIT Warangal. So presently he is also holding the chairman post of Indian Geotechnical Society Vizag chapter, and he has to his credit over 65 papers in various national and international journals and conference proceeding. So it's our proud and privilege to have Professor Satyanarayana Reddy here for delivering talk here. So welcome, Professor Satyanarayana Reddy.
Thank you, Chairman, for your kind introduction. And I thank the organizing committee for giving this opportunity to share some of our recent work with regard to effect of shape of footing on coefficient of elastic uniform compression of foundation materials. So as all of you know, coefficient of elastic uniform compression CU is an important parameter used for finding soil spring stiffness, for finding out natural frequency of foundation soil system, and for estimation of amplitude of vibration. Not only that, when you design vibrating bases or mission foundations, we will be considering different possible modes of vibration. In addition to vertical vibrations, we'll have sliding vibrations, vibrations in rocking mode, yawing mode, right, which require consideration of soil spring stiffness based on some other elastic coefficients, namely C tau, coefficient of elastic uniform shear, C5 used in rocking mode, coefficient of elastic non-uniform compression, and coming to yawing mode, we will use C psi, right, coefficient of elastic non-uniform shear. So all these other three elastic coefficients are generally estimated by correlation from CU. For that, even our IS code 5249 gives relationship. Once you know the value of CU, you can have the estimation of other, and from there you can find out what is soil spring stiffness, and you can analyze for the natural frequency of a foundation soil system for that particular mode, and you can go for estimation of amplitudes of vibration. And we can carry out design in such a way that the calculated amplitude of vibration is well within the permissible limits. So, as we know, coefficient of elastic uniform compression is defined as the ratio of uniform compressive pressure transmitted from base of footing to the elastic settlement. Simply, we say it as P by SC, right? So, this generally we will determine either from cyclic plateau test, or you can also do block vibration test. But very often people prefer cyclic plateau test because the equipment is readily available, and it is easy to perform the test. And the test is generally done using spare plates. So sometimes in an industrial establishment, all the vibrating bases may not have spare foundations which are spare in shape. There can be circular bases also. So in such a case, what happens is whatever estimate of CU made based on spare plate cyclic load tests, when they are correlated using Barkhan's well-established equation, CU1 by CU2 is equal to square root of A2 by A1, such correlation will be useful only for that particular shaped foundation. So in case you are determining CU from spare plate test plate, spare shape test plate, and if you are using projected value for circular based one, it may end in some error in calculation of amplitude of vibration natural frequencies. And one more way of finding CU is based on elastic constants, knowing E and mu using Barkhan's equation, right? So we can calculate, but finding again elastic constants, right? Particularly calculation of mu and E, right? So they need precise testing in laboratory, and that's why the more common test that is done is cyclic plate flow test. So as the value of CU, looking at its definition itself, P by SC, under a given pressure, the elastic settlement is definitely influenced by shape of footing because of the pressure bulb. The shape of pressure bulb, if you see for square footing and circular footing, is different. So for a given pressure, we are not going to have same sort of elastic settlement in a given soil, and hence the CU is going to be affected. So there is a need for evaluating shape factor so that we can switch from values of CU determined for square test plates or square foundation to circular foundations. And also, industrial establishment generally will be taking place in the suburbs of cities or metropolitan areas, where you may have low-lying areas, and there lot of filling will be done. So generally, conventional fill materials will be used and compacted in layers, but due to demand and scarcity, increased demand and scarcity of conventional fill materials, people are planning to use alternate marginal soil, particularly in coastal areas. Fine sand is predominant, so efforts are being put to improve its properties, particularly to make it more resistant to possible liquefaction under saturated state. It is being stabilized by adding synthetic fibers. So in the present study, an attempt is also made to evaluate the effect of shape of footing on CU of fiber reinforced fine sand, right? Polypropylene fiber is used from small scale cyclone tests, because if at a site the prevailing soil is saturated clay, it is always practice to replace such saturated clayey soil with a granular fill. So if at all we are going for usage of fiber reinforced fine sand, we should also have the knowledge on how CU changes and what are the shape effects on CU. So the present lecture addresses all these issues. So as all of you know, the bearing capacity expression, right? If you see given by Hansen basic and adopted by our IS code, the bearing capacity, net ultimate bearing capacity expression has factors including the effect of shape of foundation. Similarly, modulus of subgrade reaction, which we determine from plate load test, right? We will be correcting it for size, shape, and depth. Similar to that, our CU is also a stiffness indicating parameter, and the influence of shape need to be accounted for. So in the present study, we have studied the variation of CU for square shaped test plate and circular shaped test plates in 3 different soils, namely fine sand, clay of low compressibility, and clayey sand. Right, so they are procured from sites within the Visakhapatnam city limits. Sand is collected from beach, right, Trinity Park area, and Kojo soils are procured from locations from Pedavalter area, which is closer to Andhra University. The properties of fine sand determined from laboratory tests are presented in this slide. You can see it is containing 99% of sand particles, and looking at coarse sand, medium sand, and fine sand fractions. Fine sand, right, fraction is predominant, 68%. Fines are only 1. And coming to gradation characteristics, right, CU is 1.8, CC is 1.2, and it got classified as poorly graded sand. And under heavy compaction conditions, the optimum moisture content was obtained as 12% with maximum dry unit weight of 17.7 kg per meter cube, and it had angle of shearing resistance of 30 degrees when tested in direct shear apparatus. CBR value, though it is determined, it is not related to our present study, so I'm not mentioning it here. So coming to the other 2 Kojo soils, one is clay of low compressibility, other one is clayey sand. You can see clay of low compressibility has fines of 84%, liquid limit 33, plastic exfol, and it has undrained cohesion of 56 kilonewton per meter square with low angle of shearing resistance. And coming to clayey sand, it has fines of 14%, liquid limit 32, plastic exfol, and it has undrained cohesion of 16 kilopascals and angle of shear resistance of 25. So these 3 soils are chosen for carrying out for determination of coefficient of elastic uniform compression with respect to square and circular shaped test plates. As doing plate load test is laborious and time taking one. So we have made an attempt to do small scale cyclic load tests similar to cyclic plate load test in the laboratory using the loading frame, using the CBR plunger of diameter 5 centimeter, and using a square plunger made with MS plate, having the size same as that of CBR plunger. Size is 5 centimeter only. Only thing is CBR plunger is circular. The fabricated one is of square cross section. The foundation soil specimens out of the selected soils were prepared by compaction at OMCs and respective MDDs in CBR mold, and they have been soaked for 96 hours to ensure that it is completely saturated. In case of sand, though it is not required, as per practice we have done, but for Kojo soils, 4 days soaking is mandatory to ensure that soil is completely saturated. So the load test is done in 50 kilonewton self-staining loading frame. First with usage of standard CBR test plunger. So this is the one. So the load is applied on specimen. The load applied on specimen due to movement of loading platform in upward direction and making the specimen compress between proving ring and upward moving platform is measured with the help of a proving ring. And a surcharge plate of 5 kg is placed at the specimen surface, particularly in fine sand. Unless we confine it, its response we cannot properly get. Not only that, during soaking, unless there is some surcharge, there will be loosening of soil right near surface. For that, uniformly surcharge load of 5 kg is used. And prior to actual loading, a seating load of 7 kN per meter square is applied. And then the load is applied in increments of 1/10 of selected test load. The selected test load is 200 kN per meter square and 150 kN per meter square, respectively in fine sand and Kozo soils, because these values we can take from any quotes or any literature. Presumptive bearing capacity values only are taken. Here our intention is to study the elastic response of soil. So that's why pressures of the order of expected bearing capacity in such soils is taken. At each stage of loading, unloading is done and the soil is allowed to rebound. So having the dial gauge readings initial at the end of application of loading and unloading. So with the help of the dial gauge readings, the total, that is gross settlement and the net settlements are worked out. The difference of gross and net settlements will give us the elastic settlement. And a plot is made between the applied load intensity and elastic settlement. And from the plots of load versus elastic settlement, Cu is determined as slope of the linear portion of the plot. So these are the loading plungers used. Though plunger name is used here, they are not to penetrate because the intensity of load applied is small, right? So we are not causing any shear failure during the loading. Surcharge plates, anyway, this is available with standard CBR. This is fabricated one. So synthetic fibers used are of polypropylene origin, procured from Recron. 6 mm and 12 mm length fibers are used while reinforcing fine sand with fibers. So all the properties reported here are adapted from the manufacturer sheet. So these are the load settlement plots generated from small scale cyclic load test performed on fine sand with the circular plunger, square plunger. This is with regard to small scale cyclic load test performed on clay sand with circular plunger, square plunger. This is with regard to clay of low compressibility with respect to circular plunger, square plunger. From this, as I said, plots are made between applied load intensity and elastic settlement. Since the intensity of loading selected is of the order of presumptive bearing capacities, the best fit is observed to pass through all the points, and the plot is observed to be linear almost. So using the best fit lines and taking the slope, the values of Cu are worked out in the soils under study, namely fine sand, clay sand, and clay of low compressibility. You can see that in fine sand, the value of Cu with respect to circular plate is smaller compared to square plunger. Whereas in Kozo soils, that is clay sand and Cl type soil, for circular plunger, Cu value is more compared to square plunger. So if you take the ratio of values of Cu with respect to circular plunger and square plunger, the ratio is about 0.85 times. The reason for lower value of Cu for circular loading plunger is we know that the elastic modulus of sand underlying square loading plate will be higher compared to circular footing because the base area is more. So more frictional resistance will be mobilized between base of the loading plate and underlying soil, and more restrainment will be there to particles under load application, right? So because of that, there is lesser value for Cu with respect to circular shaped loading plunger. Coming to Koju soils, as we know, even if you look in terms of bearing capacity also, for a irrespective of size of the foundation, right, the bearing capacity of soil is same, right? So for a given pressure P, if you look at the volume of soil contributing to settlement, in case of Koju soils, more soil will be falling within pressure bulb corresponding to spare plate, right? So that's why in denominator, settlement is going to be more for Koju soils receiving load through spare plunger or test plate, and hence they will have lower value of CU. So that's why circular plate had a higher value. So the shape factor taken as ratio of CU of circular to spare is obtained as 1.2. So after this, the study is extended to evaluate the effect of addition of polypropylene fiber of 6 mm and 12 mm length in various proportions of 0.5%, 1% or 1.5% by weight of sand. And to arrive at the optimum percentage of fiber, actually direct shear tests are performed to find where angle of shear resistance is maximum. For conducting direct shear tests, we need to prepare specimens corresponding to OMC MDD condition. So heavy compaction tests are performed. And you can see with regard to a given length of fiber, as percentage fiber content increased, OMC values increased gradually and MDD values decreased. Same is the case with the 12 mm fiber length also. And you can observe that a slightly higher value of OMC is there for 12 mm fiber compared to 6 mm. And the values of MDD are slightly higher compared to the values achieved for 6 mm fiber. So the reasoning for this trend, we can say lesser OMC requirement for 6 mm is because of short length, they will get easily dispersed in soil, and right, you will have ease in compaction, and you can reach to maximum density with respect to that particular fiber. Right, coming to 12 mm length fiber, they offer better restraining of particles, and whatever compaction energy will give, that will be much more effective and results in better packing of particles. And though values are nearer, right, marginal increase is there. So that marginal increase we can attribute to restraining effect of 12 mm because of its higher aspect ratio compared to 6 mm. So looking at this table, for both 6 mm and 12 mm length fiber reinforced fine sand, the angle of shear resistance is right, highest at 1%, and hence optimum fiber content is observed to be 1%. Even in literature also, people reported optimum percentage for stabilizing sands of the order of 1 to 1.5%. So the small scale cyclic load tests are performed on fiber reinforced soils using 6 mm and 12 mm length for both spare and circular plungers. So you can see here, so as percentage of fiber added to soil increased, the slope of right pressure versus elastic settlement decreased. And the value of Cu is decreasing with increase in fiber content. You can see same trend even with circular plunger. Coming to 12 mm fiber, 12 mm fiber reinforced fine sand, also same trend. So if you look at the values here, what you can see is for a given fiber length, as fiber content increases, the values of Cu are decreasing both for spare and circular. Right, and one more thing, what we can observe here is with respect to spare and circular, values are not differing much. That means there is no shape effect as seen in case of fine sand. Okay, so one more thing which I have mentioned is the values of Cu are decreasing with increase in fiber content, irrespective of shape of plunger and fiber length. This we can attribute to increased elastic compression resulting from fiber replacement in fine sand. Compared to fine sand particles, polypropylene fiber is compressible. So based on this study, the conclusions which we can draw, the value of Cu for circular vibrating base or foundation can be taken as 0.8 times the value of Cu of square vibrating base or foundation. In case of Kozu soil, like clay of low compressibility and clay sand, we can say shape factor, right, to transform value of square footing to circle plate is 1.2. And for a given fiber length, the values of Cu for square and circular loaded plate, right, decrease with increase in fiber content. In case of fiber reinforced sand, there is no effect of shape. Whatever values we determine for square footing, we can use for circular footing. And at 1% fiber content, the values of Cu for 6 and 12 mm fiber are decreased by 40% and 58% respectively. So these are some of the references, and based on this work, we had 2 publications, one in our Indian Geotechnical Journal and other in International Journal of Geotechnical Engineering, published by SAGS, right, Southeast Asian Geotechnical Society Journal. So those who are interested on the topic can read in detail by referring to this data. I thank the organizing committee for giving me this wonderful opportunity to share some of our work related to coefficient of elastic uniform compression. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them and try to answer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Satyanarayana Reddy, for a very informative and interesting talk. So I request Vikas to quickly, we can take 1 or 2 questions.
Sir, there is no question in the question session. But I have, sir, one question for you, sir. Can you please, what is the effect of, you can say, aspect ratio on this Cu value? If we change the value of fiber, aspect ratio of fibers, what is the difference? What is the effect on the value of Cu we can see?
Value of Cu?
Value of Cu.
No, Cu is decreasing now, sir. A last conclusion I have shown, I think. A presentation, shall I show that? Yes. Yeah, values of Cu for 6 mm and 12 mm decreased by 40% and 58%.
Okay.
Cu means
for 6 mm and 12 mm fiber reinforced soil, but beyond this, we can, if you are using.
No, actually, sir, if you look at the interaction of for steel fiber with respect to concrete, okay, their aspect ratio plays a vital role in terms of bond. But coming to sand grains, the synthetic fiber friction mobilization is slightly working in a different manner. So actually, from the results, we have seen more reduction in value of Cu under cyclic loading for 12 mm fiber compared to 6 mm. Because dispersion of fiber is better with regard to 6 mm fiber. So it interacted in a better manner under cyclic loading. That's why lesser reduction of Cu was observed.
And is there any effect of orientation of fiber?
This is randomly oriented, sir, because we cannot keep fiber in a particular orientation. Just like our reinforcing sheets, we cannot play. It is randomly distributed fiber reinforced sand.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Satyanarayana Reddy. One small question. Any recommendations for field? Because when you apply this, I think you must have done this lab test. When you apply this in field, then how to do it practically? Because that mixing of the fibers, sir, may not happen properly. And to what depth?
Sir, actually, just like our reinforced soil bed, we replace weak soil to a depth of about B to 1.25 B.
Okay.
So there we can replace clay soil with fiber reinforced sand and we can achieve its benefits.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for a very informative lecture. So now we'll move on to the third lecture. That's the last lecture in this session. It's on dynamic response of monopile supported offshore wind turbine in a liquefied soil by Professor Sumanta Haldar. Professor Sumanta Haldar is a associate professor in School of Infrastructure at IIT Bhubaneswar. He was also visiting faculty in Department of Civil Engineering at School of Engineering, York University, Canada from May to July 2014. He was also recipient of Professor Leonor's Best Geotechnical PhD Thesis Award in the year 2008-2009 from IGS. He is having to his credit over 50 research papers in various technical journals and conference proceedings, and he has also won several research awards. It's our pleasure to have you here, Professor Sumanta, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Savarkar, for giving me the opportunity to share research work. So let me share my slide. Okay, so today I'll speak about the dynamic response of offshore wind turbine in liquefied soil. At the very first lecture, already Professor Bhattacharya has spoken a lot about offshore wind turbine and its need. As you know, nowadays we need a global energy crisis. We need more energy, more sustainable energy due to the energy demand. And we are more looking into the renewable energy. So in that perspective, offshore wind turbine is a very good solution and challenging task also to design such kind of structure, especially in seismically active areas. Due to the growing energy demand, offshore wind turbines are also installed in seismically active areas. So this is the current scenario in Indian perspective. As you can see, the India is moving towards more renewable energy as the mission of the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. So India is planning to expand its wind energy capacity from 5%, from 9% to 20%. And as a result of which, the two feasibility studies have been carried out at the potential locations. One is at the offshore coast of the Gujarat, and another one is in Tamil Nadu. As you can see, these are the feasibility study report, which is already available on the website. So this is the offshore coast of Gujarat, where this offshore wind turbine potential has been identified. And this is another location near off coast of Tamil Nadu. These two locations are initially identified by our government, and India is planning to harness the wind energy in the next couple of years, as the India has a wide coastal areas, and it has a very good wind energy potential, especially in offshore wind. So the first wind turbine in India is coming near the Gujarat coastline. So coming to the wind energy potential, so considering the wind energy potential, and which is very much relevant in India, so we can first go into the details of the wind turbine. Already Professor Bhattacharya has explained many of the wind turbine characteristics and its design issues. So I will mostly talk about the wind turbine where it is installed in seismically active area, and the soil is potentially liquefiable. So what are the challenges you may encounter during the design of such foundations, such kind of structures? So this is how wind turbine work. It's a very simple methodology. So basically the wind energy as a kinetic energy will be converted to the electrical energy due to the rotation of the propeller. It's mostly three-bladed wind turbine, horizontal wind turbine. And these are components of the offshore wind turbine. already you have seen in the last presentation. So the most of the foundation structures are on monopile foundations, as it is very easy to install, and it need less equipment, so you can easily drive the monopile. So apart from the monopile, various other type of foundations are also possible. It depends on various other factors like the water depth and many other factors like the size of the offshore wind turbine and all. So these are the components of the wind turbine. At the top you can see this is a hub and the blade, and this is a platform, and these are the substructure is mostly the foundation, and so basically the monopile foundation. The future trend, as already explained in the previous presentation, so we are moving towards a very large capacity wind turbines. So we have started with a very small range of wind turbine, but now we are looking into the large wind turbine. So as you know that if the wind turbine capacity increases, so it will also substantially increase the size, the rotor diameter, the height of the wind turbine, it will enormously increase. So if you look at this particular comparison, so the Boeing 747, the size, the length of the Boeing 747 aircraft is around 76 meter. As compared to that, so you can see the diameter, it is continuously increasing. So like it is, although of course it is it's a old one, but old figure. So in 2016, you have projected around 8 megawatt wind turbine, where the diameter of the rotor is about 164 meter. But nowadays, higher capacity like 15 megawatt wind turbine is also coming into picture. So you can imagine how much, how big the size will be. So the bigger, cheaper, and the greener, so it can produce more and more wind energy. So as the wind energy and wind turbine size increases, so design challenge will also increase. So I'll talk about a couple of the important design challenges in seismically active areas, and then we'll discuss a couple of things about the requirement of the foundation related to the seismic liquefaction and other issues. So coming to the Gujarat offshore wind turbine, like Gujarat coastline. So there's a typical borehole profile that we have I have seen in some couple of literature. So where the top around 20 meter soil is liquefiable. So it is not only in India, in various other countries where the potential soil is potentially liquefiable. So there is an additional challenge for the design of foundation in that potential liquefiable soil. And of course, various other loads like the combination, as already you have seen, there's a combination of wind load and wave load as well as the seismic load. So in addition to that, if the liquefaction happens, that may give an additional challenge to the designer. So these are the a couple of things, the common things which is already explained. So I'll not talk about much about these loads on the wind turbine. As we know that the wind turbine, it can have several type of load components. Like the hub height, it can have the thrust load, and at the tower drag will act on the tower side, and similarly the wave load is also acting at the mean sea level. The current load may also act, and so these are the general operational loads that may act on the wind turbine. So there is, in addition to that, the 1P load, it depends on the rotational speed of the wind turbine. So it is more or less, it's a mass imbalance. So due to the mass imbalance of the blade, wind turbine blade, the 1P load in general, they act in side to side direction. Another type of load is called the 3P loading, or it is due to the tower shadowing effect. So when the blade is rotating, so the blade is covering the wind turbine tower, and because of that, because of the shading effect, so it is basically the frequency of the load will be 3 times of its operational frequency. And the 3P load and the hub load, that these loads can be estimated based on the thrust calculation. So look at this diagram. So it's a wind speed, it depends on the wind speed. So there's a maximum thrust position. So where you can consider this maximum thrust force, which will act on the offshore wind turbine. and that need to be considered for the wind load calculation. Similarly, the wave load may also act, which is dynamic in nature, and in general, various theories, wave theories are applicable for different type of water depth. So for turbulency, for different type of water at different water depth, you can apply different type of your wave equations, and you can find out the wave loading. So I'm not going into the detail of the wave load calculation. So these are the typical loading pattern. So this is a typical 1P load pattern, is a kind of cyclic load, harmonic load, as well as a 3P load is a one-way cyclic load, and the wave load. So these are the estimated loads and the typical nature of the load which will act during its operational condition. In addition to that, in case of seismically active areas, we need to consider the seismic load. I will come to that. So in general, the design approaches are mostly three types. The first of all, the first natural frequency of the entire system, offshore wind turbine system, if it falls within the range of 1P frequency and the 3P frequency, so it is defined as a soft design. And when your natural frequency of the offshore wind turbine, it is below the 3P frequency and 1P frequency, it is called the steep design. So it is in between. It is called the soft-steep design. So when it is falling below the 1P frequency and 3P frequency, it is called soft design. And when it is above 1P and 3P frequency, it is called the steep design. So depending upon the natural frequency of the system, so this is the best possible design for an uncertain site. And when the natural frequency of the wind turbine is very close to 1P frequency, that is the best possible design for the strain hardening condition. As you know, for the strain hardening, maybe the stiffness improvement may take place. So the natural frequency may shift away from the 1P. And in case of strain softening site, this is the possible location for the offshore wind, for the natural frequency of the offshore wind turbine. So the response spectra, if you consider the normalized spectrum for different type of loads, like the blue line, it indicates the wave spectrum, and the green line indicates the wind spectrum, and the red line, it's basically the response spectrum of a seismic motion. Although it is, see, the natural frequency of the wind turbine, it is falling at the decaying range of the response spectra, but still, this is important for high magnitude earthquakes, where the peak acceleration when the shaking is quite extensive. So for a large earthquake, it is quite a major challenge. And not only that, so if you consider the higher modal frequencies, that may also create additional issue in the design of the offshore wind turbine. So the design challenges mostly it lies with the due to the size increase. As the size increases, so basically it can reduce the fundamental frequency or the natural frequency of the system, and that may lead to the early damage of the system. So the next interesting issue is the soil structure interaction. So ignoring SSI, it may lead to unsafe design of the structure and foundation. Already we have done a couple of studies on that. And the third and the most important part is the long-term behavior. So as the offshore wind turbine is exposed to millions of cycles of load, and it's very challenging task to what will happen to the soil stiffness if it is exposed to such a high amount of cyclic loading. So that is also challenging task. So the similar kind of figure already Professor Bhattacharya has already illustrated in his presentation. So just we have done some kind of study. So like in case of liquefiable soil, so the tilt may be like abnormal, so abnormally high due to the increasing depth of liquefaction. So these are the limit of warranty as already explained. So it depends on the serviceability criteria. So the various codes that stipulate some limiting tilt of the offshore wind turbine. And depending on that, we can decide upon the size of the foundation and the length of the foundation. So if the depth of liquefaction increases, so that may lead to the instability of the foundation. the various seismic codes and guidelines. So actually we have very less number of detailed or comprehensive guideline available pertaining to the seismic design of offshore wind turbine. So there is a requirement of the development of a detailed seismic guideline for the offshore, especially for offshore wind turbine. So it is a quite a big challenge, and it's a novel task to develop a design guideline for seismic design of offshore wind turbine, especially for the liquefiable deposit. So these are the available guidelines that ISO and GL is a German code, and IEC code, and DNV code, and ISO codes. So nowhere a very detailed explanation of the offshore, the guideline on the liquefiable soil site is explained. So we have done some couple of studies. So here one interesting fact is, see the operational condition and the park condition. So these are the different load cases that we generally consider for the design of wind turbine under seismic loading. So in mostly the natural frequency of the offshore wind turbine is about 0.3 Hz. So it is generally less vulnerable due to the low to moderate earthquake shaking. But in case of other type of motion, like if we include the vertical component of the motion, which is having the predominant frequency is very close to the natural frequency in the vertical direction. So there is a possibility of like damage in the offshore wind turbine due to the vertical component. So vertical seismic motion could be vulnerable. Various other issues like the consequence of the liquefaction, I would like to show a couple of slides here. So like the impact of the stiffness degradation. So in general, if we consider the liquefiable deposit, so that may reduce the foundation, like the support of the monopile foundation. So which is basically, it may lead to change in mode of vibration. So if you go through this particular animation, you can see if the pile length is sufficient, especially for long pile, so the sway bending mode is initiated. But in case of short pile, the rocking mode of vibration could be dominating. And especially for liquefaction, so where the foundation support will be lost due to the liquefaction of the soil, so there is a possibility of the activating other modes of vibration.
Excuse me, sir.
So,
just 2 minutes more, sir.
I'll come to that.
Yeah.
The conclusion.
Yeah. Okay.
So we have done some couple of studies on liquefiable deposit. So what would be the impact on the design response? So this is a model that we have developed, the numerical model we have developed in OpenSys. It's a coupled model where the liquefiable soil deposit and the soil structure interaction both are incorporated, and it is coupled. So when the seismic motion is applied over here, so the some depth of liquefaction depending upon the soil type and the seismic motion. So the depth of liquefaction can be easily determined from the plane strain analysis. Due to this due to the seismic liquefaction, so there is a possibility of alteration of the ground response, and that will give an impact on the response of the interstructure. So that part we have already modeled in a coupled model developed in OpenSys. So this is a different seismic motions we have considered. So we have considered the 5 motions and their properties. So I will not go to the details of those each and individual motions. So coming to the response. So first of all, we have studied the depth of liquefactions, and we found that the sustained maximum acceleration is a better way of representing, or the rational representation of the damage during the seismic event rather than the peak acceleration. So what we have seen, the sustained maximum acceleration, it basically plays a major role in the depth of liquefaction calculation. And these are the different responses that we have obtained from the combination of the operational and seismic loading, of course, in presence of liquefaction for different depth of liquefaction. So H1 over H, it's a representation of the depth of liquefaction. It is in normalized form. So if the depth of liquefaction increases, definitely there is a possibility of chance of exceeding the limiting tilt. And what we have observed, the non-dimensional response, it is found to be more in case of park condition, because in case of park foundation, the overall load magnitude is less. So if you compare with respect to its operational condition, so the amplification is more in case of park condition. Another interesting observation that we have got, if you compare two different earthquake motion, Niigata motion and the Kobe motion. So what we have seen, the Kobe in Niigata motion, it is giving a higher response, and it is mainly due to the amplification at the Nacelle level. So here you can see, so a kind of amplification here. So it's a bell-shaped decay pattern is identified at the Nacelle level. And it is basically due to the resonance. As the Niigata earthquake motion, its frequency content is close to the natural frequency of the offshore wind turbine. So we have got the similar kind of response, a resonating response. And which is also, it is very much clear from the Fourier spectrum. So you can see the black spectrum, black color spectrum is due to the Niigata, which is significantly high. And these are a couple of slides left. So vibration modes, if here we are just trying to show the impact of the vertical motion. So what we have done, we have tried to find out the mass participation factor, and for no liquefaction condition and the 10-meter depth of liquefaction condition for different capacity, different wind turbines like 5 megawatt to 15 megawatt wind turbine. So what we have got, so we have seen that around 10 modes are required to achieve 100% mass participation, and the vertical modes is observed more in case of liquefied soil, and which gives an important conclusion that the impact of the vertical motion is need to be included, especially for offshore, and higher modes need to be considered. So these are the concluding remarks that I would like to highlight here. So here we have got some couple of interesting information, like especially in case of low to moderate earthquake loading, the operational condition, the wind and wave load is dominating, whereas where in case of large seismic event, the seismic motion is, seismic load is dominating, so which will give a which need to be considered in case of the seismic design of offshore wind turbine. And also we have seen the embedded length has a greater impact as compared to the diameter and the thickness of the monopile. So, so basically it's a task for the designers. You need to consider an optimal foundation size in order to overcome the liquefaction effect on the offshore wind turbine. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Sumanta, and finishing it in time. Dr. Vikas, can you have quickly one question, please?
Sir, I think there is no question in the question part.
Okay.
Sir, the same question is there, sir. I think you and Professor Subhamoy Bhattacharya explained the things very well. Starting from the OWT technology, and then what are the components of the OWT, and then how we can say design this technology, or we can use the wind technology for wind power for the Indian green energy point of view. So thank you very much, sir, for this nice presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Vikas.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Shubhamay sir, Satyanarayan Reddy and Sumanta Haldar sir for an excellent presentations. We had a very good interactive session here. That is session number 29 of this conference, wherein the three interesting talks were presented on challenges in design and construction of offshore wind turbines, turbine foundations in seismic area by Professor Sumanta Subhamoy Bhattacharya. And then Satyanarayan Reddy presented on effect of shape of footing on coefficient of elastic uniform compression, wherein he discussed with the effects of fiber reinforcement on different types of soils. And Sumanta Haldar sir presented a nice talk on wind effect of dynamic response of monopile supported offshore wind turbine in liquefiable soils, wherein he has done detailed study of the detailed design aspects of the turbine and what are the, we can say, the responses in a liquefiable soil. So we had very excellent presentations here, and I thank all three speakers for delivering these excellent talks. Thank you very much. And now I hand over to the organizers, because the session at 3:30 is starting already. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Good evening to one and all. On behalf of organizing committee, I thank our esteemed speakers, Professor Subhamoy Bhattacharya, Professor CNV Satyanarayan Reddy, and Professor Sumanta Haldar. And I also thank our chairs, Professor Poonanand and Dr. Vikas Kumar for nicely conducting this session. And now our plenary, in the plenary hall, panel discussions are about to start. So I request all the delegates, including our esteemed speakers and chairs and panelists, to join plenary hall for the panel discussions. The hall link has been shared in the Q&A. Please use that link so that you can directly join in the panel discussion platform so that you can interact with the panelists. Thank you one and all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Sir, I would like to propose a vote of thanks, sir.
Actually, I waited for you only.
Okay, sir. I would like to propose a vote of thanks to Dr. Srivalsa sir and Dr. Ravi Jacker sir and the committee of 7 ICRAG to conduct this program and make it a success, and also to all the speakers who have inspired the young researchers like myself to always step out of our comfort zone and for the pursuit of knowledge. And also I would like to thank the chair, Professor Poonanand P. Savoykar, and co-chair Dr. Vikas Kumar to conduct this session in hall in a very organized manner. And finally, I would like to thank all the audience who for making this 7 ICRAG success even during such pandemic time. So thank you all. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Varun, for nicely coordinating this session along with Dr. Srivalsa. Thank you. Please, you all please join the plenary hall.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.